Welcome back to yet another episode of your Re-Educated podcast. Today we have the most special guest we've ever had on this podcast. His name is Goutham Yegappan. We don't have a guest today. It makes me a little anxious. I've been thinking a lot today morning of why is it that not being able to hide behind my questions makes me so afraid. And I think one of the hardest things about running a podcast, especially when you're recording only yourself, which makes me have so much admiration for the people who do, is when you don't have a script, you kind of just have to let your consciousness flow and hope that your consciousness is something that people are understanding and that people want to listen to. And so, I think about, it's funny because I think most solo podcasts are often scripted to some extent. My favorite podcast in the world is called Philosophize This. It's a phenomenal podcast, and I know he releases an episode probably once a month, if not less than that. And that's because of how much effort and research that goes behind his work. And in the span of, 20 to 25 minutes, it seems pretty scripted. And it seems that the way he's approaching his content is by making it as succinct and important. And so to do that, it takes a lot of research and just like trimming down of all this accessory information. But on the other hand, the other extreme, if you take a podcast like Call Her Daddy, for example, where there are episodes where she'll record by herself, and she is a really entertaining individual. Her name is, what is her name? It's, I should know her name. Let's see. Call Her Daddy host. Let's see. Alex Cooper. I personally don't really like the content too much of that podcast, but I'm very impressed by her work and just her ability to be entertaining. It's really hard to entertain, especially in a world where it's hard to get someone's attention for more than 10 seconds. And so it's her ability to speak on the spot and flow that makes it so entertaining and engaging. But yeah, so here's a shot to that. And you could maybe let me know of how far off I am from saying anything engaging. But I'm excited to get into today. And something that kind of made me want to podcast alone is I realized how many experiences I have on a month-to-month basis, experiencing the world and education in different contexts. But I don't end up actually speaking about it too much because I don't want to ask a friend every single time to come and host the podcast. It's just so much planning and effort that I'm like, I don't have any one person I can go to again and again to do that. So I end up just like skipping it. And there have been so many things that I would love to talk about, even if it's not educational in itself. I think some experiences that I go through teach me a lot about my own educational philosophy. And so I want to share that. And I'm realizing the only way to do that is to confront my own fears and to record these podcasts alone with no script, with, free flow of thought, and to allow for mistakes and allow for pauses and not, Googling somebody's name up. It's just part of the process. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that's something I have to keep realigning my intention to. But all right, let's get to it. Puerto Rico, to close off this season, I'm really excited to kind of get into what were some of the lessons that I took away from my time in Puerto Rico. I hope you enjoy. When I think about my travels these days, yes, the 7 months I spent in India, for example, there is a part of you that I think like is fundamentally changed every time you leave your comfort zone in some way and you recreate yourself and you learn about the world and a part of you dies and a new part of you takes form. I did not think that would happen in the month and a half that I was in Puerto Rico. I know it's a little corny to say my life changed, but I had a really profound time there. And a few reasons, but I'll start with this for the first part. I spent more time alone in Puerto Rico than I've ever spent in my life. And I want to first define what this word alone means. Because I travel alone mostly, there's been tons of time where I'm not around friends, but I'm still around people. So if I'm in London, I'm still constantly surrounded by people. And if I'm living in an Airbnb and I'm renting out a room, like I'm still with the host or I'm seeing people. I may not necessarily be close. And so I consider that one form of aloneness. But in Puerto Rico, when I was staying in Loiza for 10 days, I was not around a single person. And so to set the setting, Loiza, the place that I stayed was this beautiful kind of, it's not a resort necessarily, but it's these condos that are right next to the beach, but nobody's there. It's like completely empty. So you have to enter this gated complex, and the only person I interacted with on a day-to-day basis is the person who like opened the gate. And you walk in, and then you're in these condos, and it's empty, and you are like 2 feet away from the beach. But these aren't one of those really large beaches. It's one of those beaches where at night there's no beach, and in the morning there's beach because of the tides. And so I spent 10 days isolated. I felt like I was on Castaway or something, where I'd just sit on the beach and I'd read and I'd watch the waves and I'd watch the crabs dig their holes, and I'd, just be so shocked by how I'm just trusting that the waves just at once isn't just like, all right, I want to have a big wave now. I'm just like, I'm trusting the fact that it's going to stay consistent, which is why I'm even hanging out on the beach alone. Because if any given time it's like, okay, well, now a big wave comes, I would be screwed. And that form of aloneness is powerful. It does something to your spirit and that's only 10 days. And I spent maybe another 10 days alone, but still like, I spent maybe another, but it was still like in a suburban kind of area where I heard cars drive by. So it wasn't like fully isolated, but I spent about 3 weeks not talking to a single real life person. I called my friends, but I can't imagine if you even removed that, like true isolation, like not contact with a single human. That would be interesting. But this is no physical contact, so we can at least start there. I would say some of the biggest lessons I learned from that is how quickly my insecurities just disappeared. There was not a single moment. And I think to be vulnerable on this podcast, like, a lot of my insecurities lie around my perception of my own body and my kind of the shame that I've built up over the years of just, how I look, how hairy I am, whatever. I mean, the list is long. It's I think a similar experience of many Indians who grow up in the United States, just of, knowing that your body looks slightly different. And I didn't have it for a single second. There was no shame about my body when I was there. I spent almost 80% of the time naked, and because there's no one there. And when I was looking at my body through that lens, the only question that came on my mind is it functioning? Is it helping me walk? Is it helping me make food? Is it helping me get to the beach and off the beach? Is it helping me think? And in all of those ways, my body was functioning phenomenally. To be like, but this doesn't look as big as that. Like, what about this? What about all those insecurities just cease to exist? And what that made me realize is insecurity is a product of perception. If you're not being perceived, insecurities cease to exist. So then I realized, insecurities is not something I'm just like walking around with. It's when I'm being perceived by another, what do I think that they're thinking about me? And then how does that impact the way I feel? And that, I think, was a really profound experience because I've never felt so much self-love ever. And once I was able to feel that level of self-love, when I came back into society, I just felt like I was able to retain at least 10% of that. And I cannot imagine how that would feel the longer and longer you're able to do it, right? I mean, I haven't cut my hair in over 2 years. I haven't trimmed my beard, but for the first time there, I just felt like it's okay. Because I wasn't thinking about, what is the perception of these people, of people who have big beards? Like, oh my God, what if they think I'm X, Y, or Z? Because there's no people. The crabs don't care about my beard size. No one cares. And my beard does not impact me at all on a day-to-day basis. It is only through the world of appearances is it ever impacting me. In terms of my own, at any point, if it's getting in my mouth or if it's getting in my face or something like that, then I'll do something about it. But it doesn't. And I think there's so many things like this. Like when I hear people talk about, the left side of my face is better than my right side. While the statement itself can be quite innocent and naive, I think if we dig under to like the foundation in which a point like that can even be made, we end up finding a terrible world to exist in, which is when a person looks at themselves in the mirror, they possibly could split their face into 2 halves and then think about which side is better. And better in the sense of that someone else may look at it and consider it this abstract concept of beautiful. What can that do to a person's psyche when they've split up their face into, okay, then every time I take a picture, I must have it faced this way because this is my better side. It is all slight degradations of self-love. Because the truth is that only you know how well your body is functioning. Does it hurt when you sit? If it's not doing those things and it's helping you carry yourself, it's helping you lift heavy things when you need to, then your body is great. And I just feel like that lesson was really loud to me in that time that I was sitting there. And I was like, okay, I had to really sit there and be like, why do I have so many insecurities? Why do I feel so poorly about myself, about how I look, about how strong I am? You know, as a person trying to figure out their own masculinity and what it means to be a man, I feel like something I've always been insecure about is my strength. Am I strong enough? Like, am I capable? Can I stand among other men, or whatever, you know, my understanding of what a man is. And when I was in Loiza again on the beach, I wasn't exercising, you know, I started exercising every day when I was there. But for the first time, it wasn't from a place of self-loathing. It wasn't like, do more push-ups, you're so weak. Like, if you don't do 25 push-ups a day, or if you don't do 25 push-ups in one set, like, you're so weak, you're never going to be considered a man. It wasn't from that place of self-loathing. And for the first time, it was from a place of like, take care of your body because you're going to need it. If it's not functioning properly, your life is going to be really difficult. And so for that, stretch. For that, do a little bit of squats and push-ups and take care of your body. Love yourself. And so for the first time, my exercising came from a foundation of love rather than from hatred. And that, again, was such a profound experience of just like, is this possible? Is it possible for myself is it possible for me to view myself as enough? And I think that was the first time I'd ever gotten a hint of what that feeling was like without the validation of another. I didn't need another person to tell me I was hot. I didn't need another person to tell me I'm valuable. I was able to do it by myself. And so for that, I will always be thankful for the experience of Loiza and Carolina, and just like being able to kind of share in the wisdom and in the love of the people. I think it's not coincidental. This couldn't have happened anywhere. It also had to do with the context of the few people that I did meet, or the smiles that I was able to share with people. And so, yeah. So in one sense, that I would say be the first biggest thing I took away from my experience in Puerto Rico. All right, so now to part 2. So in a lot of my traveling, one lesson comes up again and again in the weirdest ways that I would never imagine. There's usually a day, because the way I like to travel is I don't ever have a plan. I just go into a place and I figure it out on the way. And so usually when I travel somewhere, the only thing I've planned out is where I'm going to stay the first 3 days. And I try to move place to place about every 5 or 6 days. And what I've learned is my emotions are the same every single time. The very first day, when I get to a place, I'm nervous, I'm anxious, I'm like, I don't know what to expect. I'm really terrified. Oh my God, I don't like the fact that there are snakes here. I don't like the fact that there's, it's super cold. And I don't like, you find all the things that you're not really comfortable with. I don't like that the streets look really dangerous to me. The second day, I start to take a more like pragmatic and practical approach of like, okay, what can I do now? What do I need to do to fix some of these issues? Okay, I don't have food. How do I go make sure I have enough food for at least the breakfast? So I can go figure out the rest of the day. If I don't feel safe, what can I do to make sure I got the right locks? I can blah, 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 blah. And then the third day, fourth day, I start to become a lot more comfortable with the area. Fifth day, I start to fall in love with the place. I'm like, this is the greatest thing ever. Like, I've learned so much from being here. This taught me such a unique perspective on the world. And then the day 6 or 7 comes when I have to leave. All of a sudden, I'm like, cycle again. Okay, I'm really anxious. I'm about to leave. I don't know if I'm capable of handling on this new challenge and task of going into the unknown. This process repeats again and again and again and again. And one of the things that happens is on that 7th day, when I'm filled with anxiety and when I have to leave from place to place and I'm really scared of the world I'm unknown, that particular moment is always when help from somewhere arises. Every single time. So this particular trip, I was really terrified. I was leaving, I'd spent 7 days alone in Carolina, and I was now leaving. And I really didn't want to leave because I got so comfortable there. I was going to Loiza, and Loiza was just in the middle of nowhere, and I was kind of terrified. I was like, I don't even know where I'm going, really. And so before I could actually leave, because they only let me check in about at 4, I got kicked out of the house at like 10. So there's 6 hours where I had no house. I was like lost. I was like, I didn't know what to do. And I didn't have clothes. So I was hand washing a lot, but I was like, all right, let me just go to a laundromat and just like get it all done. So I walked over to a laundromat. And like at this point, I had pulled my back really badly. So my back was not working. So I was really terrified. I was just like, my back is not working. I don't feel like I'm capable of making this transition. I don't feel strong enough. So I went to this laundromat and I like did not know what to do because one, it was I've been to many laundromats, so it's not that I don't know how to handle a laundromat, but this particular one was confusing and I couldn't really figure out like first how to get there, and then it was like hidden in this like kind of nook of a street. I eventually got there, and then they only took cash, so then I like didn't have cash, which is a rookie mistake in traveling. I took out a lot of money after that, so that's no longer a problem. But I like didn't have cash and I was like, I don't know what to do, and my back was stressing me out, and I had like a meeting for this other work that I was doing, which I'm excited to talk about later. But this guy came up to me and he like knew that I was kind of confused, and he was like, "Do you need help?" I was like, "Yes, please," because he was the only one who spoke English too. I couldn't really communicate with anyone else, which is also a big mistake of me to not know any Spanish. Um, and I told him, I was like, "Hey, you know what? I don't really know what I'm like doing. Can you help me out?" He like then drove me to the nearest gas station because he was like, "I know it's far away for you." And then he like helped me get cash. I mean, I got cash at the ATM, and then he like dropped me back. And then I had help from people there to just like kind of figure out the whole kind of system that they had. And then I was able to do my laundry and I was able to just chill there. Then I ordered an Uber. Uber was really affordable there, which was so nice. I ordered this Uber to Loiza. On the whole way there, because we couldn't find the actual location, we couldn't find food. And Loiza was a completely desolate. There was no food. There was literally no restaurant that I could walk to for like 30, 40 minutes. And so the Uber driver like drove around helping me to find the food spot. And this was like after he had charged me and everything. And so he like spent maybe like 20 minutes helping me find, and we couldn't find anything. So he just dropped me off at like at the spot, and I just like hung out on the beach until I could go in. But both of these men helped me out in a way that I really needed. And it was not necessarily even the things that they did. It was that I felt hope, because I felt really alone and scared, but I was like, there are good people out there who will help you even in those moments. And so the biggest thing that they kind of like instilled in me is the hope that don't give up. Like, don't ever be too afraid. Help is always near you, and it will find you when you need it. And I can't tell you how many times this has happened to me. I mean, even when I think about it for a second now, I'm like, there was a time when I was in Italy and I couldn't get on the train, and I was really like, it was late and I didn't know how to get to the spot. And this guy like took me over to a nearby, like, I don't know what it was. He was like, "You Indian?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "I'm Indian." And then he like took me over to this, like little gas station type thing nearby, and he like bought me a ticket for the thing. And there was another guy who like, just so many times where people are very helpful. And it's like interesting because I think once you've like given yourself up from having to be like, "I'm tough, I can figure it all out, I am perfect," then somehow, and you can sometimes be vulnerable when you're like, "You know what, I can't figure everything out. Sometimes it's hard and there are things that I just don't understand." Then the right people just find you. And this has happened enough times that I feel like it has helped me establish a strong foundation in just my belief in people, which is why I think I'm able to make some of the risks that I do, because I never feel like I'm alone. I always feel like people will help when they can, and so long as it's not like super excessive. I've just never pushed the boundary. I'm curious like where people stop. At what point are you asking for too much? But I think I wanted to just share that story to say one of the most beautiful things about traveling and doing it in a vulnerable way is learning how there are a lot of really great people on this planet. And all these people helped out in ways that they did not need to. They gained no benefit from it. There was no financial incentive. They just did it to help me out because I needed help. And that there's something so beautiful about that. And you don't get to ever experience that enough unless you're in need of help. The only time you get to actually experience that is when you're vulnerable enough to like walk into the world saying, "Hey, I actually can't do this alone." And the thing is, a lot of things in life you can't do alone. if you build up systems around yourself where you never leave your home, you like only do the same thing again and again, then perhaps you can live in like a delusioned way where you're like, I'm doing it all by myself. But I think it's just too difficult. There's too many unknowns in the world, especially when you're traveling, that I think like you can't walk around being like, I will figure it all. So that section and segment is to say people are awesome. And I am very thankful to those who have given me a chance and helped me and out of just like the kindness. And I hope to give back as much as I possibly can in that same way. So part 3. I mentioned earlier that it was kind of silly of me to go into Puerto Rico without knowing any Spanish. I want to touch on this. We spoke about this on a previous podcast with Fabia Postal. I'm trying to figure out which episode that was. That was episode 51, season 2, episode 10, where we spoke about cultural sensitivity. She was a phenomenal tour guide and has been working in Mumbai for over a decade. And she talked a lot about her experiences of working with a lot of foreigners and who she felt kind of traveled in a just very ignorant way versus those who didn't. And what were some of the biggest differences in behaviors and characters between the two. I think it's a phenomenal episode and I would definitely recommend that. But I went to this teacher training program and it was fully in Spanish. And, the person leading it, who I ended up interviewing, kind of just laughed and she was like, you really came to this and didn't know any Spanish. Like, how are you going to come to Puerto Rico and not even try to learn Spanish? Which I think is an important critique of also my own kind of effort that I take as I travel, right? I think to go into a different country and to not even, and again, I don't know, I'm speaking country in general, Puerto Rico, yeah, that's a whole other thing. To go into another space and not take the effort that it takes to like learn about the place that you're in a deep matter sense, I think is one of the lowest and most terrible forms of tourism. So I'll give an example. I had a friend once who traveled to Jamaica. And, they stayed in the resort and they had a lovely time. But then they were like, one time they left the resort. And then they kind of had the realization of like, this doesn't look at all like the resort. Like the lived experiences of the people on this island are very different than what we're experiencing on the resort. And you can see this happen in so many different places, right? I mean, you stay in San Juan the whole time. You stay on these resorts. You never have to leave. You never get to see what else is happening. And so I think what ends up happening oftentimes in, Cancun, I mean, there's so many examples where this idea of traveling somewhere else, staying in a really nice area of it, and not really understanding what else is happening in the rest of the space that you're staying, I think, it's just such a terrible form of tourism. It's saying, hey, I have some money, and I'm spending this money to not think about the problems of the world. So don't remind me of them. I want to live in my fantasy world that all life is about is margaritas and partying and like having a great time with my friends, which is totally fine. But I think it's wrong when it's done on the backbone of places where like those luxuries are clearly not distributed to other people. And even the benefits of tourism is not distributed evenly as well. So like if you were to go do something like that in, I don't know, like a place that's already wealthy enough, like Dubai, then perhaps it's a little different. But when you do it in a place where I feel like as soon as you leave your resort, for example, like Tijuana, like, is that I say it right? Tijuana? Oh no, I used to live in San Diego, I forgot. But I just remember so many people sharing how like they felt unsafe the second they left like the few streets that they like wanted to go to, right? Like it's like, but that's a sign that like perhaps there's like deeper injustices and issues that are happening that if we're going to spend time there, we have to really spend time addressing. And so I spoke with a lot of local people there on just their thoughts of tourism. There was, I spent a month in Hawaii during the pandemic, and at that point there were no tourists on Hawaii. There's maybe like 5. And so it was just the locals. And so we got to spend a lot of, beautiful, intimate time, like speaking about people's experiences of what are their thoughts on tourism. And in both places, it's conflicted, where they're like, we understand that our ability to, for transportation, for all of these things, a lot of the money comes from tourists. And so we are very appreciative for that. But at the same time, we also see how destructive tourism can be. where there's no care for the culture. People care about having a good time. If your entire island, if it gets destroyed, then they'll just move to the next place to have a good time. No one cares about the place itself. All they care about it is themselves and their ability to have pleasure on your space. But there's no like respect for the space. And I also am doing this by not spending even a single week trying to learn Spanish, right? Like trying to understand in a deeper sense the people around me. I asked questions and I tried to do what I could, but I always think I can do more. And so I want to say this statement to say that moving forward, I would love to now commit to also learning the language of any place that I went to. I did a better job when I was in Italy, and when I was in France, I really tried writing down, and I didn't do that this time around. I think that's because of my own kind of issues, just taking Spanish for 3 years in high school and having such a difficult time, and all the stress that came from just never understanding it, having to walk into a room and take a test and be like, no, I don't understand this at all. But that's a old decade ago story, and so now it's my responsibility to be active about the way I learn about spaces. And even if I'm going to go somewhere to have fun, to do the due diligence of also learning about like what else is happening on here. I can't just blindly have fun on the backs of other people's suffering. I mean, that's brutal. That's terrible. When I was in Puerto Rico, I actually binge watched the entire Hunger Games series. And it feels for anyone who remembers, it feels very District 1-esque, where you're able to put on makeup and feel lavish and all these things when other people in your society are slaving away and are having these terrible, difficult lives. And so I just keep calling to mindful tourism of don't only focus on yourself, just open your eyes and see what's happening around you. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us who travel. And so now for part 4. So for the next section, what I wanted to talk about was the education aspects that I saw itself. So I worked with a institute that basically their whole project and mission was they helped teachers learn the Montessori method so that they can then use that in their classrooms. And they were a private organization that were funded by the government to go work into instill a lot of their teacher training programs and materials and things like that into classrooms around the island. And they worked with over hundreds of schools, and they taught them the Montessori method. So I learned a bit about the Montessori method. I'm doing a lot of interviews on that, and I don't feel prepared or expert enough to speak on it yet, but I'll say some of my high overwhelming kind of just my first thoughts when I was attending some of these teacher training programs. And we've touched on this concept earlier, and so I'll kind of pin back to it. But when I went to the Montessori teacher training program and I saw all their materials and things like that, everything was so aesthetic and so clean. I've never seen materials that are so beautifully color coded. Imagine you have an aesthetic eye. If you're an Instagrammer, these classrooms are the place that you'd want to go to. Have you ever seen a classroom that's aesthetic? If you haven't, then you got to go into these Montessori classrooms. So clean. Everything is it's so aesthetic. I can't even really explain it. I mean, let me try. So all the colors are pastel colors. They're muted. They're the greens, the yellows, the red. They all have this. There's no bright colors just screaming red at you or green. They're all muted, nice tones. They're earthly tones. Okay, and then after that, all of the circles are so spherical. All the papers are cut exactly, so they're square shapes. Everything, you can tell that there's attention to detail everywhere. So phenomenal. So, I was asking them, why is that the case? And they were saying that a big belief in the Montessori thing is that a student can only learn if their environment is clean, if their materials are nice, if their books are nice. Because how are you going to respect a book that has a bunch of graffiti all over it, right? I mean, I can go into public school, I can tell you how many phallic objects were all over my stuff, right? I mean, and so perhaps your relationship with the material itself is different because of that. So I love this philosophy. I completely get it, but I have one problem with it, and this is something I've experienced a lot in very prestigious, bougie, rich schools, which is the farther and farther you get separated from what the real world looks like. I feel like you end up bringing up really like brittle children. And I think, seeing phallic objects on your books, in many ways, I think speaks a lot to like people's rebellion, for example. Like you have a deeper sense of understanding of why do people hate school? Why do people hate learning? Why do people dislike, their lives or their jobs, or where does all this pain come from? The more you try to build these like institutions where everything is so perfect, everybody's so happy, they're all, jolly all the time, they just love learning. It's like that's just not what the world looks like, unfortunately. And so here's the question. Should schools resemble the world, or should they be abstracted and distanced from the world? So when I learned about UCSD's construction of like why they built it where they built it, one of their biggest things is they wanted to build it so it was kind of like a haven away from the rest of the city. So it's you can just go onto the UCSD campus, you can live there your whole life. It's so vast that can feel like its own city. You can just kind of lose yourself on the campus itself. It was very intentional. It wasn't just coincidental that they built it like that. So there are benefits to that, right? I was able to think about abstract math. I was able to think about physics, and I was able to think about these things without being burdened by homelessness, without being like burdened in the sense of like having to confront the fact that these issues happen in society, not by the people themselves, but without having to be burdened by the realization of poverty and mental health issues. And because you can just think about the school your whole day. So, but at the same time, I've talked about this many times about how this is an issue that I experienced in Georgetown, where people are studying homelessness, but are afraid to ever walk through people who are suffering, not having a home, or whether people who are suffering through the mental health issues that often people in that condition have. Like, you're so abstract from the actual problem that you're dealing with that you don't really know anything about the problem you're dealing with. So the question is, perhaps for some of these abstract topics like math and physics, you don't necessarily need to be like in the world. But if you're studying any of these humanities, the same type of learning I don't think is as effective. I don't think you can learn about you can learn about the complexities of homelessness unless you're like dealing with homeless encounters and unless you're in those spaces. And I feel like that gives you a whole different understanding of the issues. And so when we come back to, and perhaps like, at higher ed, it's a different issue than at 6th grade or 5th grade. And maybe at that age, you should have abstract spaces where they're just able to have fun. But it's not an easy answer. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure whether school should be a haven or school should reflect what the world looks like. And perhaps if we're afraid to make it reflect what the world looks like, that says something a lot sadder about our current predicament. And so, but I do think it's an interesting question, and I'm not always a fan of schools that are like overly posh, of just like, there's a correct way to act. You must dress like this. There's a correct way, what is the right form of clothing? How clean should it be? Like, what does it mean to, they kind of impose their own definitions of like what is rightful action. And I've always been really against that. But I also was fascinated by how beautiful their equipment looked. And so, it's both worlds. And so I'm curious to hear, if any of you have thoughts on that. I would love to, my email, gy118@georgetown.edu. Love to hear your thoughts. So part 5, which is where I think we are now, is how effective is the public sector versus the private sector? So this is something, okay, so moving forward, they're going to become more and more abstract and economic and things like that, all fields that I'm not experts of. So anybody who actually knows what they're talking about is probably going to look at me and think I'm silly. But I'd like to remind the listeners, I am 26 years old. When I'm 60, I think I'll have a better sense of what I'm talking about. But you still have to trace your kind of intellectual journey. So back to the question. What is doing something through the public sector more effective or less effective than the private sector? So this entire institution, the reason that they were their own organization, separate from the government, rather than because I was like, why doesn't the government themselves just directly do this? Why do they need a middle person to kind of go through and have them do it? And they were like, the government faces a lot of corruption. When they're given certain tasks, it just gets done a lot slower. So what they just found would be more effective and have a higher level of accountability is to just have it done through this middle organization. where they would have all the responsibilities of making sure that everything gets done properly and they can fully focus on that, while the government just has to fund them with money? It's an interesting question, because what it ends up, when we think about like some of the biggest problems that we want to solve within our society, we often think it's the government's responsibility. The government should do this, the government should do that. But it's not clear whether they should do it by funding another organization that does the work, or whether they need to build the organizations within themselves and do it, right? And so that was just a question I was thinking about. I was like, how do we make that decision? Who is actually more effective? And it brought up this idea of corruption, I think, a lot, of just thinking about what does it mean for a tax dollar to be spent well. So I actually ended up having this really long discussion with my dad about the US debt, which I realized I know absolutely nothing about. The fact that I think we're $30 trillion. First of all, what does that number even mean? $30 trillion in debt. And then the fact that, California is billions of dollars in debt. And so the reason why is, first, I learned some interesting stats. Most of our debt is actually not to foreign investors. It's to, I think, the U.S. public itself. But the foreign country that we owe the most debt to is Japan, which I did not know, and I thought that was really interesting. And then China, number 2, and then every other country after that is like much lower. But what does that even mean? What does it mean to be $30 trillion in debt, and what is that impact for us? So there was this big proposition in California that, proposed this bill there was like a thing to deal with, help homeless people with housing, but people had really good arguments on both sides. A lot of people were saying that it's taking money out of cities and it's actually going to be less effective, and the state wanted to it was a whole thing. But one of the big, and it passed by a few hundred votes. It was insanely close, and it took until the last day. And one of the really interesting things about that is I heard a lot of people say, look, California does not have money. How are we going to just keep on taking more and more debt? Like, who ends up eventually paying that? And I feel that as a young person in this country, that is something that our generation is going to have to deal with at some point. I don't actually even know what it means. And so I'm excited eventually to, take on a season of just the economy of education, of like, when we, where is all this money going? How do we better budget it? Why are we so in debt? And how is it that people keep giving us more money when it seems impossible to pay that off? It doesn't make sense to me, and I'm not an economist, and so it's all way over my head. But I think it is a question that we must answer, because in a lot of these issues, what it seems like is when we, anytime I see a proposition that's like, let's increase budgeting for X, Y, or Z in education, I'm always like, yes, 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 yes. But figuring out, okay, is it more effective, connecting back to the original question, for private entities to take these problems on? Should we not even burden the government with more and more debt to take on these projects? Should we actually just figure out other creative ways to get private entities involved? Could, I think, be a really good possibility. And so, yeah, because I am a firm believer in Khan Academy. I think Khan Academy has done some of the best globalized effort of kind of mass educating many people. I think it's phenomenal, and they've done great work, and it's not done through a government agency at all. And there's many like that, Coursera. There's many that just are not done through the government. And so, is it better to just kind of fuel a rich environment for these kind of private entities to take on deep educational problems? Could be a better solution than asking the government to do it. So yeah, so that was that thought. And so there's many more, but I think to end today's episode, the last one I'll speak about is the power of the beach and the power of the forest. And we went into the El Yunque jungle, and it, beautiful, and the power just of nature. I think it's something that often we unfortunately are stripped of, and there is something so calming and enlightening about a beach and the ocean itself that offers completely different wisdom than if you were to sit there and just stare into fire, which is completely different than if you just sit under a tree, or if you smell a flower, or if you watch animals live, right? I mean, each understanding the world around you teaches you a lot about yourself and about the world. And it is a really important way of learning, observing things that exist outside of humans. Because I think you can draw a lot of parallels. And it is another form of being in which you can get very creative about your own solutions. Perhaps you don't know how to solve it through the mindset of a human. So think about it how an ocean would solve it. Think about how, like a cat would solve it. Think just these offer different perspectives, I think, and are very integral to like a more holistic thinking. So I think, I heard we had an episode, one of the early episodes on what is good art. And, one of the things that they had shared, the two guests, phenomenal women, they shared that one of the best art projects that they give is they go into a museum, but they don't walk through the whole museum. They tell every student, find something that speaks to you and go sit in front of it for 30 minutes. Like sit in front of it for a long period of time. And they were like, if they had the time, they say 2 or 3 hours. And just experience it and write down, what are your thoughts? What are you feeling? Actually live the piece. And I think this form of learning can be very powerful because it trains your ability to perceive, and it trains your ability to be patient, and it trains your ability to observe. All really important things. And so just sit there and watch the waves for 3 hours, 2 hours. And what do you come up with? What do you learn? What are things you realize about yourself? And I think oftentimes what ends up happening is when we don't do these things, we are robbed from the wisdoms of the things that exist naturally in the world around us. We don't always need to learn from books. We don't need to learn the chemical compositions or why waves occur. There's no way you have to learn about the ocean. Just sit there. What thoughts naturally come up? I think this form of learning through nature is one that has been very helpful for me, and I think is something that should be recommended more. And so perhaps we can write a whole list of all the natural things that happen around us. Like perhaps we can, how volcanoes, you can talk about volcanoes, you can, experience. I don't even know. I don't even know how many things you could perceive like that. I mean, icebergs and glaciers. I don't think I've ever seen one of those. Like I've never walked through the Arctic, or, I've never seen a polar bear. I've never, I've been in a few rainforests, but I've never, slept on a rainforest ground. Like it's just the levels of depth of experiencing nature are so deep that I feel like it's something that we should tap into and attempt to, outside of a classroom, outside of the concrete jungle, go experience the real jungle, but yeah, I can't believe it took 42 minutes. I'm actually quite proud of myself for being able to. I think this was okay. I'd like to know what you guys think, but I think I did an okay job. But this was a Puerto Rico, I think, changed my life. I met some of the most lovely people, the best mofongos. Oh my, whenever I think, there's few foods that I have found enlightening. There's one day when I was traveling again on day 7 when I was stressed, I stopped by this spot and had a mofongo. It changed my life. I was like, I believe in life. This is beautiful. Mofongo, fried plantain with with chicken. It was so good. I would highly, highly recommend. But I had really good food. People all smiled. There was a certain sense of peace that I think a lot of people embodied. And every place has its own challenges as well. So it's not to romanticize anything or any place, but I really had a special time in Puerto Rico, and I'm very appreciative for the island giving me the space to experience all that it had to offer. And so thank you, Puerto Rico. And yeah, thank you all for listening. I just wanted to say this process has been really beautiful. I haven't, really spoken directly to anyone who may be listening, but really thank you. This journey has been really exciting, and I'm excited to see how far it goes and where it takes us. And I think if we can continue having these conversations and re-educating ourselves as people, as adults, and eventually that trickles down to our kids and to the larger society, I think we have a bright future. But I do think there's a lot of things we have to reconsider and critique. And so, yeah, but thank you for listening and for giving me, the chance to explore myself. And that brings us to the end of our conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you again for listening and making this process so much more enjoyable. If you haven't had the chance to already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts to get the latest updates on new episodes. If you've been learning useful information here, feel free to leave a review as well. A little bit goes a long way in spreading this podcast. And have a wonderful day. And as per usual, stay re-educated.